Weird question. Have you heard anyone say
The Metaverse?
lately? Unless you've been living under a rock, there's a good chance that you've seen a ton of people talking about the metaverse. It's been on the news, it's all over the internet. There are think pieces. You know things are really hitting their stride when there are think pieces. I'd wager if you've heard the term metaverse, you probably are in one of two camps. You either know exactly what the metaverse is and are mild to moderately upset at everyone getting it wrong right now except for you, or you have no idea what the metaverse is and are really confused by everyone telling you what it is or isn't. Given that you are watching a video essay right now, and I am clearly, at least for the time being, a video essay man, you're probably expecting me to tell you, in parts, exactly what the metaverse is and why it's totally rad or bad or something. Well, bad news. That's not what I'm actually going to do because I've recently come to a revelation. Despite thinking about the metaverse, writing video essays arguably within the metaverse, and just generally being meta-brained, can I say that? I have come to the conclusion that I actually have no idea what the metaverse is. But here's the thing. I don't think anyone does either. Because as it turns out, the term metaverse is meaningless. It's customary, as part of the introduction of any video on the metaverse, to immediately start talking about Snow Crash, Neal Stephenson's 1992 cyberpunk novel. I'm not going to deviate from that in this video. So briefly, yes, the first usage of the term metaverse came from Snow Crash. While I won't recap the entire book here, the short version is that the metaverse was a 3D, virtual reality-based internet built by coders, an escape from an extremely dystopian, fractured society in which the United States government had collapsed. In the metaverse, you could be anything, and theoretically, you could escape whatever awful fate you'd be given in reality. The metaverse was, in many ways, building on the themes and concepts crafted by another cyberpunk author a decade prior. That author, of course, is William Gibson, with his own proto-internet, cyberspace. While that term was not coined by Gibson, he was the first to use it to describe what was, essentially, a networked computerized hyperspace in his short story Burning Chrome in 1982, and then most famously in Neuromancer in 1984. In popular culture, both Stephenson's metaverse and Gibson's cyberspace are envisioned as next-generation internet spaces, an evolution of the current internet that we have today. This thinking, though, has always been a little off the mark, because the internet as we know it today, or even as we or I knew it 20 years ago, was nothing like what existed in either the 80s when Gibson was writing or the early 90s when Stephenson was writing. Both of these novels were not seeing the internet as it was and then imagining the next generation evolution of it. No, they were trying to imagine what our internet today would be. The metaverse is, and always was, an exaggeration, much in the same way that the entire universe of Snow Crash was an exaggeration. The extent of some of this exaggeration has been lost over time, as is the case with a lot of near-future sci-fi. When the technology and history presented in a piece of fiction start to become reality, threads of meaning start to erode and become lost. Technology in most science fiction is really just a metaphorical tool. It's something used to exaggerate some problems of modern life in such a way that it becomes hard to ignore them. It's a thought experiment, purpose-built by the author to underline something interesting to them. Cyberpunk often isn't really set in the far-flung future, but rather 20 seconds into it. That's sort of the point. The questions it asks are most of the time, though certainly not all of the time, about technology that seems like it could be just 10 years away. In this case, I personally have always read Snow Crash as a tongue-in-cheek critique of the specific sort of brand of futurism preached in magazines like Wired in the 90s. Most early cyber counterculture was defined by baby boomers infected with both weird STEM department anti-establishment enthusiasm and general post-Cold War hubris, who believed that the emerging technology of the internet would fundamentally solve all of our problems, connect us better, and dissolve class. Often these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs were seen as brilliant visionaries, a model the rest of the country should follow. The internet, just like Snow Crash's Metaverse, was seen as a panacea, an escape, an oasis built by engineers and coders, a place of pure logic, free of corruption. The Metaverse shows through satire just how wrong this thinking is. As cool as both are, they're really just tools that can be, and are, exploited and corrupted. But while it might seem like I might be leading up to a point of comparison here with maybe something having to do with Facebook's weird insistence that employees read a book that contradicts their very MO, I'm not, at least not here. But, and this is important, the Metaverse, the only Metaverse, is truly this Metaverse. What hero protagonist goes into is the Metaverse. What his friend gets turned into unrecognizable static for, that's the Metaverse. Stevenson's little bind baby of neon lights and nuclear-powered android dogs, eternally shackled to a digital realm, is the only true Metaverse. It's the only time the word Metaverse has concretely meant something that we can all agree on. Stevenson's usage of the term Metaverse is concrete. The Metaverse in Snow Crash is a specific place that is adequately defined with barriers and limits placed upon it. This Metaverse, and no other, is the only one we can all agree on. If someone says that word and is not describing, talking about, or referencing Neal Stephenson's 1992 book Snow Crash, then, well, I do not know what they're talking about. And I don't believe that anyone else knows what they're talking about either. It's impossible to separate the term metaverse from the conceptual soup and context that it was born into. The metaverse, in this context, is as much a story about the failings of people building it as it is about futuristic nightclubs or weird avatars. But take it out of that context is exactly what people have been trying to do, even me, for the last almost 3 decades. Of course, words evolve, and they don't just mean one thing. Nor do words remain frozen in a casket crafted by them for the authors that came up with them. If that was the case, a whole heck of a lot of Shakespearean terms would likely no longer be in use. But language doesn't work that way, so here we are. And likewise is the case with any time you write or make anything. A distinct lack of media literacy dooms your work to be contorted in ways you never intended. The cool rises to the top, and all the pointed criticism fades away. So Metaverse, even early on, quickly became a prefix of sorts to describe anything futuristic, cool, and built from polygons. Anything and everything, even remotely cool, has been described as the Metaverse. Any product, even tangentially related to 3D or the internet, has been described as the Metaverse. VRML was the Metaverse. John Carmack claimed to build Doom as a precursor to the Metaverse. ActiveWorlds was described as the Metaverse, and it even had a metaverse within the Metaverse. Second Life has been described as the Metaverse. Fortnite has been described as the Metaverse. Literally everything, even remotely connected to technology or the internet, at this point in time is the Metaverse. Even things that aren't on the internet are the Metaverse. Everything is the Metaverse. While the Snow Crash Metaverse is extremely defined down to the mathematical precision of 2 to the whatever power, the term Metaverse is the VR journalist / influencer / YouTuber / whatever version of the dark souls of It's a modifier designed to sprinkle on some notion of connectiveness, boomer-inspired hippie 90s web.com social salve, and high-tech wizardry. But Stratus, are you really writing a video essay complaining about the usage of the term metaverse? Is that really what you're gonna do now? Yes. Yes, it is. Because it is a meaningless, stupid term, and it's always been this way. It's just that there are a lot of meaningless, stupid, nonsense terms that exist, but very rarely does any one person get tormented by them as much as I get tormented by the word metaverse. Look, all I'm saying, if the advice du jour of marketers is to append an endlessly liquid term to your brand, that's a good sign that that term is meaningless. It's that term's liquid nature, its ambiguity, that makes it such alluring fodder for grifters. It feels futuristic. It has a high-tech mouthfeel. It conjures images of the future, and yet it's nothing. The metaverse has about the same linguistic integrity as .com did in 1999. Every time I see people talking about how, no, the metaverse is the future because look how much money is flying around, I'm tempted to constantly and naggingly remind people of how companies would add .com to their name to increase their valuation, even if their business had literally nothing to do with the internet. In fact, this is why it's called the .com bubble in the first place. Investors were not interested in any internet technology, just that they seemed sufficiently on the internet, even if they weren't. But even before the money seemed to sniff out the metaverse grift, no one has ever known what this term has meant. No one talking about the metaverse to any other person is actually saying anything worthwhile, because no one actually agrees on what the term means. And I want to be clear here, I'm not saying that I know what the metaverse is and these other silly corpos don't. No, I want to make that abundantly clear. I do not know what the metaverse is, and no one else does either. Ask any 6 nerds on Twitter what the metaverse is, and you'll get a passionate but friendly argument where they all come to an agreement on what it is, while absolutely not coming to any agreement on what it is. Simply bring up the metaverse and you will have legions of nerds telling you that the metaverse has already happened years ago. Then they will tell you what the metaverse really is. Then someone will tell them what the metaverse really is before someone else will come in and correct both of them, telling them both, no, you are wrong, because the metaverse hasn't happened yet, because no one has built a metaverse using the blockchain. I will then promptly mute that person, and if this is not Twitter but real life, I will smile and internally remember that I will never intentionally have a conversation with them ever again. Instead of showing you thousands of clips of this playing out, I will just beg you to trust me as someone who has made a handful of video essays about something frequently referred to as the metaverse. You need to trust me here and believe me when I say that a lot of people have painstakingly described their personal metaverse to me, absolutely convinced before I've said a single word that we are 2 gargoyles of a feather. When 2 people do this at the same time, the conversation always turns to, what is the metaverse really, man? And to this day, I have politely continued those conversations, acting as if I really did care so as to not be perceived as rude. If you are one of those people and are watching this now, I'm sorry you've had to learn this way, but I really do not want to discuss what the metaverse is. I would go as far as to say that through various conversations, both professional and not, I've had maybe more conversations than anyone on the planet with people that go,
But is this really the metaverse? I think the metaverse really is.
I think it's important here to state that, once again, I'm not any better. I've been this guy too. When I first read Snow Crash and was introduced to the metaverse as a kid, VR chat is exactly what I was envisioning. That it truly got with virtual reality, or the metaverse, the absurdity of the metaverse. Active Worlds was the perfect representation of the metaverse outside the metaverse. And when I say local, I don't just mean local to the metaverse. Stay dead! You can't hurt me anymore! After a lot of deeply personal introspection, I deeply apologize. After my 432nd conversation like this, I simply have come to the realization that the metaverse is simply whatever you want it to be. When you try to nail down, when you really want to say, this is what the metaverse is, you end up spiraling into a level of insane precision for which you spend thousands of words that always devolves simply into just a freeballing your own sci-fi fantasy, the flavor of which often aligns with whatever beliefs about futurism and technology are close to your heart at the time. For the loudest futurists, the metaverse is defined as the next evolution of the internet, a place with no boundaries, where you can be whatever you want to be, where you can choose to exist however you like, in a place free from money or boundaries. For the pop culture poisoned, it's a place you can go and hang out with avatars representing all your favorite video games and movies. For the most boring people, it's a mall you can visit to buy NFTs. And yet, for the absolutely most horrid, boring people, it's an investor prison of all the above, wherein nothing is the metaverse, while at the same time, the metaverse is everything. A catch-all to absorb any potentially interesting technological innovation over the next 100 years, just so your venture capitalist investor futurist bingo card is an absolute winner. Matthew Ball, a VC investor who is frequently cited as having defined the metaverse in many terminally virtual circles, admits in his Metaverse Manifesto that we don't really know how to describe the metaverse, a phrase that gets progressively more absurd the more you think about it, especially when you realize it's found in what is just basically an investment white paper. I could probably make an entire video on why I dislike Matthew Ball's writing on the metaverse. I do think Ball is the most accurate at describing the metaverse in the sense of what corporate entities are trying to market. But this is less because of any concrete sense-making done here, and more because it's a literal wish list of things that would make basically any billionaire come. Considering he is essentially describing a techno-libertarian utopia that is removed from the real world, yet allows for infinite growth in a fantasy land devoid of regulation or any central governing authority. Although this could just otherwise be described as managing to simply find a way to provide artificial scarcity in a land of infinite abundance, at the same time as meticulously crafting a blueprint for a digital late-stage capitalism bonanza, Ball handwaves away anything that could actually conceivably, by other nerds, be considered the metaverse. In some ways, almost verbatim saying that places I feel most people pre-2019 would have probably pointed to as like the metaverse aren't sufficiently metaverse. But really, Ball's motivations for his metaverse aren't that deep. Not that far down, he reveals that even if the metaverse fails to become literally any of the things he just said, it could still drive trillions of dollars in value as a content medium. Really, when you get to the bottom of it, Ball's description of metaverse is just a hip, marketable stand-in word for next generation internet, or just the future, or maybe even literally any possible technology that could evolve from now to infinity. But I'm not really interested in critiquing Ball's vision of the metaverse here. And showing it, I'm not trying to then yell at it and break down why he's wrong. Rather, I'd like to just posit the simple fact that his definition of metaverse is antithetical to that of basically anyone I've ever met in the communities that previously would have called themselves the metaverse. For me, and I imagine a lot of the aforementioned group, the metaverse always essentially meant what now we simply call social VR, a more boring but also more accurate term for a group of programs like VRChat, Neos VR, Rec Room, and so on. Social VR is pretty well defined. You can point to it and know exactly what it is and what you're going to get. You expect a social experience in virtual reality that involves user-built content. Perhaps there are non-VR ways to access those platforms, which does make the VR confusing, but that is still the ideal way to interact with said platforms. It's what they're designed around. But here's the thing, while social VR is the metaverse to me, for others it's only just one part, or it's just the beginning. Maybe the metaverse won't be real until exponentially magic technology happens and we upload our brains into the mainframe. As mentioned earlier, the primary flashpoint for a lot of this discussion was Facebook's rebranding to Meta and their hijacking of the term. Many are afraid, terrified even, that their preferred future is about to be erased by Zuck and his army powered by more money than God. Yet, I'm not really as afraid as the rest of you seem to be. And that's partially because I'm high on my own supply here. Based on everything I've said, I truly believe that the ontological ambiguity behind the phrase metaverse is the actual prime motivator behind the rebranding, more so than any actual drive to create something resembling Matthew Ball or anyone else's metaverse. I think it's probably worth a press conference, a few tech demos, and a few $1 billion to fundamentally try to build what is essentially just Web 3.0, but with a creative business mask so that you can make the argument that all these not connected technologies are actually really connected because they're part of the metaverse. And therefore, that would allow them to fundamentally establish a monopoly while hand-waving it away as just building their metaverse, man. Consider this company was just in the crosshairs of the US government in what appeared to be, no matter how toothless, a genuine trust-busting effort, and I think you can see the through lines here pretty clearly. I mean, or maybe it is completely believable that a company with more money than God, access to literally every single marketing team in the world, and the ability to conjure basically any singular whack job belief into reality, couldn't build a basic 2-hour presentation that simply says, do you want to hang out with the friends you haven't seen in 2 years in virtual reality? Or alternatively, is this a company that looked at Google's essential slow march to control the entire internet under the guise of simply improving search and building a web browser and saying, hey, we could do that, but like more? Regulators might catch on, but if you can claim that it's all part of building one unified, coherent thing, then, well, maybe you don't have to sell off Instagram or Oculus or Facebook. At the end of the day, this doesn't seem to be, at least from my outside perspective, about trying to do something cool and revolutionary with technology, so much as it's about the plain and boring thing of just trying to control and collect as much data from as much of the internet as possible in any way available to them. If you can manage to build an entire ecosystem and convince regulators that, no, you don't control the market, this is just your metaverse, like all these other companies' metaverses, maybe you can get away with a $1 trillion game of sleight of hand. Truthfully though, whatever verse Meta decides to build, regardless of if they build exactly what they claim to be wanting to build or just a loose confederation of Facebook apps with a VR headset attached, it's basically as legitimate as any other metaverse that people have previously come up with. To be clear, I'm not saying I'd be a fan of this conceptualization of the metaverse, but at the same time, I see no real good argument for why Facebook's metaverse isn't any more legitimate than any other metaverse. Yes, it would be completely divorced from the primordial techno soup that birthed the term, but If we are to really just throw out all the other context around it, like everyone else is doing, then why not? If you're sitting there right now extremely angry that your metaverse isn't being properly represented or whatever, I'd argue the issue here isn't that your metaverse was hijacked, but rather that it never really existed or could have existed in anyone's head but your own. If you're angry at me for that statement or anything else, consider what I'd said earlier. No one has defined the metaverse as a real concept. Not as a literary device here, but as a concrete and meaningful technology. Most people are just tacking on cool stuff they like or communities they are part of into the term and making it their headcanon. Plenty of people will swear that they know what the metaverse is, or rather, they'll claim to know the one thing that is the true mark of the metaverse. Is it all of your digital goods moving from one ecosystem to another? Is it a unified digital currency? Is it a digital twin, a virtual model of the real world that changes in the simulated one? Is it VR? Is it a persistent digital community? I've heard people defend all of these things as the one true mark of a real, actual, honest-to-goodness metaverse. But here's my simple question. Why? Why any of them? Why are any of those things the metaverse? Is there a general consensus? When did that happen? What about when people use the term earnestly to describe the internet of the 90s, or Second Life, or a million other things? What about the series of tweets you've been seeing during this whole section describing random products as the metaverse? As I mentioned earlier, very smart people will debate these things on Twitter, and maybe there's a nugget of truth in one of them. But I'm not convinced, and I don't know how anyone else could be either. I don't doubt that we will see bits and pieces of all these technologies take hold in the future. I don't even doubt that they might change how we interact with the internet. But is that natural, gradual evolution in technology the metaverse? It seems to me, at least, that picking and choosing any of these technologies to plant the metaversal flag in is arbitrary. What's really happened is simple. Some techie dreamers had their cyberpunk digital hallucination hijacked by marketers who have ruthlessly cut up what was a 3-decade-long dynamic brainstorm into chum for investors. At one point, maybe there was some use to the term, some camaraderie within it even, but it's time to give that up. It's gone, if it ever really was anything to begin with. As a term, and maybe even as a concept, the metaverse is a failure. It's a bloated, cybernetic corpse, perpetually being stuffed with the hopes of both genuine dreamers and grifters who last ran dry trying to create the Uber of pooping or whatever. And no, this isn't really about Snow Crash, or a term being manifested in literature and then being taken to mean something slightly different. Other terms have been lifted from sci-fi and have been useful, even ones from Snow Crash. Take Avatar, for example. Avatar, also a term created by Neil Stephenson, is used regularly, and I don't have a problem with it at all. I'm not even talking about things like 3D avatars, like something in VR chat. I mean, even in things referring to just an icon or profile picture of yourself. Those are all fine. That is perfectly okay. While this isn't the precise meaning, it's obvious where and how the chain of meaning fell. Avatar fundamentally means a digital representation of your identity. That I can sum it up that neatly and simply, I think at least in this case, is a good sign that the term is pretty concrete and efficient. It's useful. On the other hand, metaverse isn't. There is no usage wherein metaverse actually is a useful descriptor. As proof, take a look at anyone that describes their product, service, art project, whatever with metaverse. There is almost always, immediately following that word, a string of more words to clarify what was said. If you remove metaverse here, you haven't actually lost any meaning. But what now? If you're into this sort of tech, if you've been invested in some sort of metaverse in your own head for the last God knows how long, what's the next move? Well, the first thing I'll tell you is this. Despite everything I've said, they're going to build the metaverse. When William Gibson first coined the term cyberspace, he did not envision exactly where that term would go.
All I knew about the word cyberspace when I coined it was that it seemed like an effective buzzword. It seemed evocative and essentially meaningless. It was suggestive of something, but had no real semantic meaning, even for me, as I saw it emerge on the page.
Despite its meaninglessness, cyberspace became something. Cyberspace, in many ways, was the pre-metaverse metaverse, yet it served a more concrete purpose. In the 80s and even early 90s, we didn't really have a good way to describe the digital world that existed both within our computers and in our brains. While not intended to fill that gap, it fit nicely and thus became shorthand for the place within the internet. Not a place you can physically go, although you could physically visit the hardware, but rather a place hosted within. Gibson's glibness about his term is unsurprising. He probably didn't mean too much by it, outside of some cool term that fit perfectly into his prose. Yet his intent didn't matter. The things his book became attached to and the culture around it fundamentally ended up shaping an entire generation. While cyberspace feels like an antique now, it did carry some important theoretical weight, a tool for fighting digital qualia. I don't think that the same thing is going to happen to Metaverse. Cyberspace fit because it fundamentally describes something previously indescribable, something we hadn't interacted with at all. The screw needed a screwdriver. The screwdriver didn't need to invent the screw. With the term the metaverse, that isn't the case. Everything in the past that could have been called the metaverse could probably more accurately have been called something else. And realistically, that's exactly what we did and will probably continue to do. Maybe MUDs or MMOs or Second Life or VR chat are the metaverse, but maybe they're just MUDs or MMOs or social programs or whatever. You don't learn more about these places by calling them metaverses. You arguably learn less. You end up grouping together a bunch of diverse experiences, all of which have their own merits and interesting things about them. You make them all a little worse by grouping them into just one whole grab bag category. But realistically, all of this doesn't matter. The people that are building the metaverse will fundamentally get to define post hoc what the term actually means. Almost certainly, however, I think once the metaverse is created, which is to say once Meta successfully spends $7 billion marketing their specific idea to everyone, it will probably immediately go by a different name and likely one that people will actually use outside of weird enthusiast corners on the internet. I think it's likely that this metaverse will be nothing like the one that you want. I do not think it will be open or welcoming or particularly innovative in any way. I think it'll likely simply be a new platform controlled by a large corporation that simply wants to throw together as many technologies as possible in a bubble that allows them to charge forth in the eternal struggle of
endless growth.
And I think that when that does happen, people will likely continue to defy the metaverse by claiming that this isn't one, but that their own imagination baby could be. And so we will be stuck in this endless loop. You'll see think pieces by academics desperately trying to criticize something that's fundamentally vapor, followed by some sort of sublimation by investors and technology enthusiasts, followed by niche communities claiming that the thing has never existed, or if it did, it existed long ago, and always have, and always will. It's just not that. And so, with that last bit of pessimism, I offer an olive branch. If you have had that cyberpunk virtual reality future gestating in your skull for the last many decades, then you're still allowed to do that. If you're a creator, I think you should build that or find somewhere that's at least creatively aligned with what feels right to you. I think you maybe can get the exact thing you want. It's just not going to be called the metaverse, and honestly, if it's not evident by now, I think that's probably a good thing. After all, you're watching this video on the internet, not in cyberspace.